food deserts, or nutrition. But generally, the research and the body of research that I looked at, there was a lack of research that looked at how these programs were communicated to recipients, or that understood how recipients existed across space. And finally, there was a lack of research that contextualized these changes within the broader trends that were happening. So this was an interdisciplinary study, as you know. So I brought two disciplines together that are traditionally not used in this work. First was geography, that contributed the idea of geography of social difference. So how did SNAP recipients exist across space, and how did these lines of social difference interact with their experience of the program? So to make that a little bit more concrete, I'll share an example that I learned from my research and my interview analysis. SNAP recipients in general tend to be a very transient population. They might lack a permanent address, they might experience homelessness, or they might just have a volatile nature in their life where they're not having a consistent address where this kind of mailing would get to them. And then a second key piece to that, which I learned through my research, is that the most essential means that SNAP recipients learn about the program, know how to apply, get support for the program, is the actual physical network of their friends and neighbors and community around them. So if they're moving constantly, they're not going to have this key element for applying to SNAP. And then the second is public policy. So you can't do a good policy analysis without understanding how bureaucratic institutions function, how policy is made, how it's implemented. And I grafted from public policy this notion of policy feedback. So it's a cyclical idea that when you implement a policy, the effects themselves inform the design and the future implementation. And this specifically is how I framed my policy recommendations at the end of my paper. So the research process really began in fall 2015, nearly 2 years ago. And it started with me sort of tapping the connections that I had through my work and internship experiences in Baltimore and trying to understand these changes. And really, in the end of the day, about a third of the time spent in this research was just understanding these crazy, maddeningly complex policies. And I mentioned Baltimore City and the city of Baltimore as the government because their assistance in helping me understand these policies and giving me data that I wouldn't have had access to as a student, in meeting with me and inviting me to meetings, this research literally would not have been possible without their help. So for methodology, I did an interdisciplinary literature review, but I also coupled that with a qualitative interview analysis. So this consisted of 5 persons who worked with SNAP in Baltimore, or SNAP recipients in Baltimore in varying capacities. And I tried to get a relative breadth of participants, so someone at least from government, business, nonprofit. So for example, an outreach worker at a major Maryland hunger relief nonprofit, or a high-level employee in the Department of Planning. And I did this through the sociological term snowball sampling, so I found a participant who then organically and informally referred me to the next, and the next, and the next. And I sort of framed these research questions through these focus areas I developed from the get-go, which was information design, technology access, and support services. And through the interviews, people revealed challenges, points of interest, and recommendations they had for the future. So in order to bridge these disparate disciplines, I used what interdisciplinary scholars talk of as building complex multi-causal explanations. So that's basically, I came at this project realizing that the understanding of what happened was incomplete and fragmented at best. I wanted to do something beyond a policy analysis. I wanted to integrate a spatial analysis into my understanding of how SNAP recipients related to the program. And I didn't want to just let this explanation sit there. I wanted to do something with it. From beginning to end, this research project was framed with an interest in me being able to do something to benefit the city, to benefit the people that I'd worked with for years. So I tried to take this explanation and develop pragmatic, actionable, and sort of synergetic solutions to this problem, and that was in my policy recommendations. So my results, this is relatively condensed, but as I mentioned at the beginning, there were disparities in lines of social difference. So when SNAP recipients got this in the mail, if they got it at all, they might not have been able to read it because of literacy rates or numeracy rates. They also might not have spoken English as a first language. There were no Spanish forms gone to any SNAP recipients. And I thought this quote was particularly cutting. One of the outreach workers said, "I have a master's degree," and I couldn't understand the sign. And beyond the issuance schedule change, the online platform had difficulties as well. People might have not had access to computers. They might have not have access to public transit to bring them to a library where they could use a computer. Or they might not have known how to develop an email address that was an essential sort of pivot point into using this online application. And solutions throughout the entire process, there were two that came up over and over again. One was that if we are going to modernize these programs, if we're going to use technology, this software is highly capable of personalizing it, so why don't we? The second was cross-sector collaboration. So the Department of Human Resources is the department and the agency that rolled out these changes. And they really, I mean, a bureaucratic program finds it difficult to work with other agencies, but they have the capacity to do so. So if we can think of creative ways in which people can work together and divide labor and resources. Limitations in future research. So as a student, there were ethical and practical barriers for me interviewing recipients themselves, although I think that would have been the most meaningful way to conduct this research. And my integration of disciplines was useful, but I admit that it was incomplete. I would like to see in the future information systems, for example, being integrated to an understanding. So key takeaway, as social service programs like SNAP become increasingly streamlined and modernized and undergo political scrutiny, policies must address social difference of SNAP recipients as it occurs across space. And I'll leave you with one note just to further contextualize this. As to add to my research, Governor Larry Hogan a month ago released a $200 million initiative to modernize all Maryland social service programs. So this is becoming increasingly relevant and timely.
Questions from the floor? Have you got anyone before me? Is there another hand on it?
I don't know. No.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I ask you, I'm torn between two, so I get both if they stay awkward, but have you met anywhere that is doing this well? If we talk about related research in the USA in 2017, where would you draw inspiration from and why?
New York State has done something in terms of getting more cross-collaboration and engaging their nonprofits. But Maryland actually, because of its being a relatively progressive and well-funded state, is probably the best equipped to deal with these changes that I at least encountered. In terms of the Department of Human Resources actually being open to people and their ideas, like Department of Human Resources, I learned, has a working group and actually listens to ideas. Even the higher level members in their agency listen and understood that this program didn't go as well as planned.
Was there somebody else you're looking at?
Oh,
Go ahead.
so you had like particular focus areas, right? Which shows how did they change from when you started the project? Because it was a 2 years process, 2 year long process. So how did it change when you started it? And now?
So the 2 years was more just understanding it. I didn't begin to design my research process, particularly my interview questions, until just last semester, really. And my focus areas at least stayed relatively similar. It was how I framed my interdisciplinary literature review, and it was basically how can I condense all the things that I've been told in informal conversations and sort of get at the key barrier points to these two policy changes. So I don't know if they were perfect, they're definitely not, but they were helpful, they were useful in my research.
This stuff is so confounding between the constraints on the recipients and bureaucratic things and money things. I'm really glad you're going into this area because it's going to take something. I'm just thinking that one little thing you said about Maryland trying to invest in modernizing this stuff, and I feel that never has anybody challenged me when I say every single online interface I have ever used, every single time it upgrades is worse. Right? I mean, weather.com gets worse. You know, my bank gets worse. I worry that just this generic problem on top of all the specific problems is really daunting.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I heard that sentiment from a lot of the people who've been doing this work, particularly with food. I think what is most promising, and this is great for an interdisciplinary room right here, is bringing in creative people who understand how to create user-friendly software, who maybe work in the business sector and aren't used to these government programs. And I think we see that in the startup world and the iPhone app world. So I had recommendations to bring in a graphic designer to go through this, to do sort of simulations and walk participants through and see, like, can they navigate this website on their own?
Instructional system design, maybe.
Yeah.
It just seems really daunting.
Well, hopefully we can make it better.
Do you mind then if I bounce it back and say, what's New York doing?